Well, hello. My name is Rich Lang. I'm the pastor at Lake Washington United Methodist Church in Kirkland, and interviewing a longtime friend of mine, Dave BUECHLER, who is doing some mission work in Chiang Mai in Thailand. And so I wanted to start with, we met, and we were both, we met in the whole pastoral process, and you received, through the course of the years, you shifted directions and you received a call to go to do something that I think is pretty scary and pretty risky, and that's take yourself out of your comfort zone completely, your orientation zone completely, place yourself in a different context. And that call was the call of Christ, to share Christ in a different way, in a different place. And so I wanted to begin there and just ask you to share a little bit about what was the particulars of that call. How did you experience wanting to be in ministry, Methodists would say, in the global parish?
Well, again, my name is Dave BUECHLER. I was a pulpit pastor in Gooding, Shoshone, Richfield, Idaho, leading up to the last year we were in the pulpit was 2011. I left in June of 2011. But for probably a year leading up to that, we all sort of felt like we were being called into something else. We didn't know what it was, but we felt like we were to move on. I assumed that it was going back into working in the correction system. I'd been working a little bit with the Idaho Department of Juvenile Corrections, creating a grant-funded program, this kind of thing. So left the pulpit. Our last Sunday was June of 2011. A couple of weeks later, went to a planning meeting, talking about this grant-funded program. Grant writer stood up, talked about it, what the grant was going to do, and all these wonderful things. And I don't really remember much of that conversation, because the last thing she said was, and since this grant is beginning when my grant ends, I've gone ahead and written myself in as the administrator and submitted everything. And I'm in a room full of like 40 people, most of whom knew that the job was mine. All, it seems, except the grant writer. And so suddenly I had nothing. Did some exploring around, and Thailand and Southeast Asia kind of rose to the top of our consciousness. We contacted pioneers for an interview, asking, what could this look like? They interviewed us and said, yeah, we want to partner with you. We have an orientation coming up in January. Now, this was August, so we're 4 months away. Why don't you see about coming down to Orlando for an orientation? We have one in January, and we have one coming up in October, just 2 months away. So we decided, if this is something that we're being called into, if this is God saying to us, you need to do this, then we're going to be able to come up with the finances to go to this October training. We weren't working at the time. We didn't have the money to afford that trip, but we decided, okay, let's see where this goes. And within 5 days, we had pretty much all the money that we needed to make our trip down there. And so we really felt that was what God wanted us to do. We really felt like we were being led in that direction.
That wonderful series of coincidences.
Yes, yes. We like to say that coincidence is when God decides to remain anonymous.
Yeah. And huge risky move. You're married, you've got 2 young boys at the time. And so you take your family, and you have moved all the way into Thailand, and you've moved there. And I remember how you began was you got involved very early on in the I would call it the demonic void of sex trafficking. And so you got kind of a taste of the horror of that. And I want to ask a question about that. And you've moved from that into both education, into a music ministry, into orphanage, into prison ministry. Again, interesting how God uses your past. Nothing is ever wasted. But if you could just do a quick run through of what you discovered when you went into ministry. What were your ministries that you wound up being immersed into, because it wasn't a pulpit ministry?
Right. When we initially went there, we were anticipating being somehow involved in working with victims of trafficking or working with families or something like that. And that's not directly what we do, but a lot of what we do indirectly impacts that. The work in the prisons, the work with the orphanages. English teaching is a wonderful platform to be in Southeast Asia on. Everybody wants English teaching, and they want it in the schools, they want it in the prisons, they want it in the universities, they want it everywhere. And the prisons really struck me because the prison system in Thailand, it's a two-tier system. The lower tier is, those are the ones that you hear about, the really horrible places that nobody wants to go. They put you in a cell and throw away the cell. The second tier is all about rehabilitation. At every level, whether it's juvenile, whether it's women's, whether it's men's corrections, all of those, they're about rehabilitation. Because they see the kinds of things that are happening in the villages, happening with girls being trafficked, and they want to provide people opportunities to better themselves without having to go into that.
Yeah. And they are the government.
The government, yes. The government is all about rehabilitation.
Yeah.
It's striking the way Buddhism is practiced in some of the smaller villages actually encourages trafficking because of the idea of karma. If you are born, you have bad karma. If you are on earth, you have bad karma. The only way to know that you have good enough karma is if you achieve nirvana.
The enlightenment.
Right.
Yeah.
Karma is not really a good or a bad balance. It's like a bank account that is in the red. And you are always in the red if you have flesh.
Yeah.
So many Buddhists believe that the way to improve that in your next life is to be persecuted or to suffer in this life. And so they, in a way, out of a sense of helping you, they will allow you the opportunity to suffer. And so they will sell their children into slavery to help them suffer, to help them come back in a better way when they come back in their next life. As a victim of that, you see the same thing. I'm suffering in this life. That means when I come back, my karma will have improved.
And you're learning this. I want to keep exploring this. You're learning this because another aspect of your ministry is the relationship that you've built with the Buddhist monk. And,
yes.
Yeah. So if you could talk about that, and then let's come back to. I'd like to ask the question of bad karma and original sin. How those two fold into each other, or how they're different. But first, you've got this unique opportunity with this monk.
Yes, I've had that's been a wonderful friendship that we've developed. Originally, I started in just helping teach class. Went into it with I made sure that the monastery knew that I was there as a religious worker. I was there as a missionary, as a Christian, and that didn't bother them at all. They wanted to have me come in and teach English. And so from the very outset of that, the monk would be talking about Buddhism in conversational terms, and then he would ask me to put in ideas of Christianity and how things are different, how they're the same. To your question about karma, in one of our conversations, he explained karma in a way that I had never heard before. And he explained karma as it's almost like there is this well of souls, if you will. And when we die, our soul is put back into this vat, and everything is swirling around. So all of our souls are intermingled. And then every new soul that comes out has bits and pieces and little droplets of all other souls. And so the idea of karma is interesting within that, because everything is by chance. And so I can do all kinds of good things in this life, but if I'm coming out as, little droplets of everyone else, that's not going to make any difference. And it puts Buddhism on just this sort of treadmill of existence where you continue, and you have no hope of ever getting off that.
So, and so the connection you made, and it reminds me sometimes of what I've heard in the past. I don't hear it as much anymore, but some of the New Age teachings was, whatever horrible thing happening to you, you need to have it happen to you. Mm-hmm. You need to go through that because, existence has a lesson for you. And so, versus a Christian model that, there's something, if suffering is happening, something has been perverted, something has been bent, and that our call is to straighten the bentness. And yet we're also afflicted with this backpack of burden, this original sin. So how have you struggled with that, or how have you tried to integrate all of that in the work that you do?
I would say probably the main difference between Buddhism and Christianity is the idea of hope. Within the karma system, whether it's the vat of souls or just coming back, there's very little hope that you can do anything concrete to change the outcome of this life, of your next life, whatever. There's very little hope involved. You just kind of go and you're at the whims of fate and of luck. Whereas from a Christian perspective, we have that hope. We have that hope that there's one simple thing that we need to do, and that is to believe in Christ. That is to accept the salvation that we're given, and suddenly all of the other outcomes go away. And we have that hope that all we have to do is say that and do that and come to a saving knowledge of what Jesus did, and we're off that treadmill.
And so would you say that that within Christianity there's this individualization and there's more of a collectivization in Thailand, or does that not really fit?
I would agree with that, and that plays into how they do church. Whereas in the American church, a lot of times we sit in the service, and everybody sort of sits in their spot, their reserved section of the pew, finish up, and everybody says goodbye, shakes hands, maybe grabs a cup of coffee, and then leaves. In the Thai church, it's very much more of a unit. It's very much more of a family, and folks come together. They'll get there early. They'll have banter. They'll have time of fellowship. Nobody ever sits in the same chair from one week to the next. Once they finish up, they have a meal together, and it's very much more of a collective. Very much more of the idea of we're all connected in this.
And that would be the positive part of Thai culture that you're experiencing, is that they have not lost that sense of being one, being connected.
Yes.
Whereas the individualization really singles us out.
It does.
And so when you're in your ministry with inside the prison, a couple of curious questions is, who are they? Why are they in prison? And your role in that prison.
Most of the folks that are in the prisons we visit are there for drug offenses or low-level kinds of assault. And so, again, the Thai government sees the kinds of people that are in that second tier, and they want to help them rehabilitate. And many of the folks that are there get that this is their one chance of not going back and not having to come back into the prison, not having to go back to the same life that they were a part of. And so many times they will take advantage of that. Our role is to go in, we essentially go in and do church. We're the pastors. I go in, I deliver, I do the special music, but I try to be more in the background versus the Thai pastors that I work with, because I don't mind going in and being sort of the visiting dignitary or the honored guest or whatever, but I don't want it to be my ministry. I want it to be their ministry, which ultimately is going to become the ministry of the inmates. One of the things that we were beginning to work on before the pandemic hit was creating self-sustaining Bible studies within the prison itself, training the inmates how to lead the Bible studies, whether they're believers or not, training them how to study the Bible, how to read it, how to discuss what it's saying, training them in leading it so that they can in turn train one another and have this Bible study going with or without us leading it.
Yeah.
The idea then being when they go back out to their villages, they can do the same things there, and they can begin these kinds of studies in the villages that they came from.
Much like how Christianity began.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, circling back, what you find, a big question, and I think it's mostly from the liberal wing of the church. A big question that Christians have is they believe in developmental work. Let's go there and build, help pump water into communities that don't have water. Let's teach those kind of skills. Let's do developmental aid work. But when it actually comes to sharing that there is a different worldview, that Christ and the Buddha's fine, but they're not the same, and that there's a different worldview. How do you, as a missionary, walk that balancing line? You shared a little bit in the sermon about it, but how do you walk that, or how do you balance that line?
I guess for me, it's trying to find the fingerprints of God within the belief system of Buddhism, because God's fingerprints are there. As I mentioned, the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is a wonderful place to jump off, because if you read the book, the Buddha and Christ and Solomon were talking about the same things. They were struggling with the same kinds of things. Where they diverge is the conclusion. Buddhism points inward. Solomon points to God. So, walking together through Ecclesiastes, listening to the Buddhist take on it, sharing the Christian take on it, walking through that, and then discussing where the conclusions go is a great place to jump off on that.
And do you find that with your friend, the Buddhist monk?
Yes, we've had conversations on that, just how in many ways what we believe is similar, but in many significant ways it's not. And we discuss the similarities to build up trust in order to be able to discuss the differences. And it's about discussing. It's not us going in and you're wrong, you have to do this or you're going to go to hell. It's about that conversation. It's about sharing. It's about filling in the whole sphere of what truth is.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. Thank you for that. I come back to the start of our conversation, and that there are different ways to look at problems. And if you're looking at sex trafficking, and if, for example, but it goes all the way. If you're an orphan, if you're a prisoner through some really bad choices you've made, if you think that you are stuck in those choices, that the script cannot be broken in this world. If you think there is no hope, that can lead, in my mind, to a passivity and a conformity, and the values of Christ is that, no, there's a new creation. There's an egg about to break, and there's new life that's emerging, and be part of that future. And that's a huge difference in worldview.
Many things are based on luck. And, I don't know if I believe this, it might work, so, I'll wear this amulet, or I'll light incense to this spirit, or I'll do that, and maybe one of these is going to work. But there's no hope involved in that. It's just, I'm going to do whatever I feel like I can, and hopefully I will come back better. But, part of the offering tangible types of things, we don't do a lot of building projects. We don't go in and build roads. We don't provide water, not because that's not a need, but because that is something that the Thai people can provide for themselves, and we don't want to go in and take that from them. What we want to do is go in and empower them in the ways that they can benefit, like teaching English, like teaching basic first aid, like providing opportunities to work with the orphans, to job training, those kinds of things.
And you said, and I wanted to make sure we just re-said this again, the point about English is not a colonialism. The point about English is?
The point about English is in ASEAN, in the economic summit that they have developed, that is the language of ASEAN. That's the language of the commerce that they are doing. The reason being, they don't want one specific language from one of the specific countries to be the language that they work in, because then that will give that country more power. Yeah. They don't want it to be Chinese. They don't want it to be Malaysian. They don't want it to be Thai. They want it to be a neutral language like English, which is spoken in many, many countries around the world, and which is the language spoken by the vast majority of foreigners who come to these countries for vacations and to live. They want to be able to use English to communicate with the people around them.
It reminds me of something from a seminary class a long time ago, is that the Romans building the road system was the great opening for the gospel to be spread throughout the Mediterranean world. And so in your context, it is the opening of a felt need to learn English becomes the entry area for the gospel to incarnate.
It becomes a very real entry point in that. In the prisons, when we go in and teach English, we will oftentimes use the Bible for reading practice. And we let the officials know that that's what we're doing. We're bringing in the Bible so that we can practice English reading. And they're fine with that. And so what we do is, instead of taking in a Bible, we'll print off a Bible passage, we'll print it in English, and then we'll print it in Thai. We'll take that in, practice reading, and then they will take that with them. And so they will have a passage of Scripture, they'll have the Beatitudes, and they'll have the Beatitudes in English and the Beatitudes in Thai. And they can work and practice their English pronunciation and then look down in the Thai and see what it means, what it says, and understand it. And the government, the prison officials have no qualms about us doing that whatsoever. So it's a very real foot in the door to be able to take in English in that way and give them a skill, give them a marketable skill that is going to help improve their lives, and at the same time, introduce Christ.
Thank you. So you and Andrea are here.
Yes.
And this is, I guess, your furlough for several months, and you're going around to churches, and both the churches that support you, and you're going around to organizations that support you, and that's the whole reason for this interview. is, I'm trying to do my bit to also help support you, because I believe in you. I've seen your ministry through decades now that we've known each other. And so as we end this interview, what you'll find on the screen is the ability to donate, the ability to contribute and to partner with this ministry. And again, I think you said it really well, but just to reiterate, Pioneers is kind of the holding tank. That's the organization that
Yes.
holds the money, but we are contributing directly into your
Yes.
ministry.
They're the ones that deposit money in our account every month, but they're not the ones that are paying us.
Yeah.
It's donations from folks in the churches and folks in the foundations and friends and family and things like that send money to Pioneers on our behalf. And then Pioneers doles some of that out to us for our monthly expenses, and then puts some of it aside for retirement and insurance and other incidental kinds of things.
And I know that you're growing fabulously wealthy on this, and especially with both your boys now staying in the States because they are college age. It's got to be a concern. So I want to encourage you to dig deep in your pocket, and also encourage you simply to correspond with Dave and Andrea as they continue the work that they're doing in ministry.
Yes, we welcome any correspondence back and forth. We will have an email address available and all that. We would love to hear from folks on this side and be able to, if you're interested in getting prayer letters from us on a monthly or ish basis, we'd be happy to send that out and just give a monthly overview or so of the kinds of things that we're doing.
Yes, your newsletter is worth reading. So I'll endorse that. So thank you for taking the time for this
Thank
interview.
you. It's my pleasure.
I'm fascinated with what you said about karma.
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated with that. That's not going to be edited out. And there were, as you were talking, I was just thinking, oh, yeah, yes, of course. And I've heard that because I don't have a lot of interactions with Buddhist thinkers, but I have heard that through how it's been Americanized
Yes.
in the New Age. But that's like, I've had lots of conversations
We
about
we
that.
had the, I was Joan of Arc in a former life, and
Right.
that's
not
Buddhism.
Yeah.
That's not Buddhism. That's no. I mean, it almost sounded, when he was describing it, it almost sounded like sort of like celestial Kool-Aid. And, everybody dies, and it gets kind of dumped back in, and then you stir it around, and then open the spigot, now comes a new person, and it's,
Yeah.
so karma is irrelevant when you look at it in that way. Karma is utterly and completely irrelevant. I can be the nicest person ever,
Yeah.
and if I still get dumped into that, when I come out, there's only a small little bit of me that's coming out. And
That's
so,
And it's so disempowering.
I mean,
Yeah.
you look at a story like Bartimaeus, and in a karma
Yeah.
way, Bartimaeus is getting exactly what he deserves, because in his former life he was a schmuck, and so he's now this blind guy sitting on the side of the road, and he's suffering, and he's being made to suffer because he deserves to suffer. And then when he comes back in the next life, maybe he won't be a blind guy, maybe he'll be whatever, and Jesus upsets that apple cart entirely.
Yeah.